What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you were listening to the Clems with a Z podcast. So I was on a plane the other week, scrolling through the in-flight movies. I saw the new Bob Dylan film, and I figured, why not? So I pressed play. And shortly in the movie, there's this scene where the folk singer Pete Seeger shows up in court. And I was thinking, like, why in the world would this folk singer be in trouble for a song? And after a little research, I was able to find out that it was because of the song "This Land Is Your Land" by Woody Guthrie. And that confused me a bit because in my head, "This Land Is Your Land" was about as safe and as patriotic as a song can get. It's a classroom song, a campfire song, something you teach kids with hand motions and smiles, not a song that could get someone dragged into court. But here's what I didn't know until that moment. In its original form, the song "This Land Is Your Land" was a protest song. Woody Guthrie wrote it as a direct challenge to the idea of American exceptionalism. That's a tough word to say, exceptionalism. Even as a response to God Bless America. And Pete Seeger, who carried Guthrie's music everywhere he went, refused to drop the protest verses. And I had no idea. I had no idea in that song that there were lines about no trespassing signs, flipping the idea of private property on its head. No idea that there were verses about people standing in hungry bread lines, wondering if this land was really made for them. No idea that this song had teeth, and that those teeth were filed down over time until it became the feel-good, sing-along song that we all grew up with here in America. And sitting there on that plane, I realized, if I could live my whole life singing this song without knowing it was a protest, how many other stories have I been handed in their quote-unquote safe versions with all the disruptive parts cut out? And you can see this pattern in a song everywhere. We sanitize, we sand down the edges until what's left is safe, marketable, and easy to swallow. Here's a few examples. Take Che Guevara. He was a Marxist revolutionary, a guerrilla fighter, a man who believed in tearing down systems of power by any means necessary. Today, his face is a logo. You can buy it on coffee mugs, t-shirts, mass-produced by the same kind of capitalism he spent his entire life fighting against. Go on Amazon right now. Check it out. Or Bob Marley. Most people know him now as just a poster child for reggae, weed culture, and good vibes. But Marley's music wasn't really about chilling out. It was a soundtrack of liberation. He sang against colonialism, systemic oppression, the struggles of the poor. Yet somewhere along the way, that edge got filed down into a dorm room poster that says basically, relax. Then there's Martin Luther King Jr. We remember him for his I Have a Dream, which is beautiful, but it's not the whole picture. Toward the end of his life, MLK was speaking boldly against poverty, against racism embedded in economics, and against the Vietnam War. He was deeply unpopular with the government, and even with many white Americans. But those sermons almost never got quoted. We sanitized King down into a dreamer, not a disruptor. How about Nelson Mandela? For decades, he was branded a terrorist, locked away in a prison because he dared to stand against apartheid. When he was released, he carried a vision of reconciliation, yes, but also one of justice and systemic change. Now he's often remembered as a gentle symbol of peace, while the fire and radical edge of his politics get tucked away quietly in the background. Mother Teresa is another one. She's celebrated worldwide as the saint of compassion, remembered mostly for her smile and selflessness, but the complexities of her theology, the theology of suffering, her politics, the harder questions around her work, those don't often make it into the story. Even John Lennon, We remember him for peace signs and imagine all the people. But Lenin wasn't just singing about harmony. He was challenging war, empire, nationalism, even religion itself. That Lenin is really harder to market, right? So we mostly keep the peace and love poster version. There's Cesar Chavez, and I'm really sorry if I said his name wrong. His fight for farm workers' rights was radical, relentless, deeply tied to justice. But what we remember now is a neat labor rights hero story stripped of the sharper edges of his politics. Go into Target. You can find a t-shirt with Ice Cube, Tupac, even Rage Against the Machine. All symbols that were not safe. They were challenging and aggressive. But now it's their stories are $10 and anybody can wear them. So over and over again, the dangerous get declawed. The radical gets repackaged. The revolutionary gets remembered in a way that no longer threatens anyone. And once you begin to see it, like me, you can't unsee it. And maybe the clearest example of all, the one that probably hits closest to home for me and maybe for you all, it's Jesus. Because we've done the same thing with him. The Jesus most of us were handed in Sunday school or from the pulpit was safe, tame, the gentle shepherd, the personal savior, the moral teacher who just wants you to be nice, obey, and stay in line. That Jesus fits neatly on a stained glass window, a bumper sticker, or a church billboard. But the Jesus that we meet in the Gospels doesn't seem so safe. Let's go to John chapter 2. He walks into temple courts, the very heart of religious power, and starts flipping over tables, scattering coins, driving out the money changers, and calling out the exploitation happening in God's name. That's not meek and mild. That's a direct challenge to a system that has gotten cozy with profit and power. How about Matthew 21? He rides into Jerusalem on a frickin' donkey, a deliberate parody of the Roman military processions that marched into the city with war horses, soldiers, and weapons. He comes in on a borrowed donkey, surrounded by peasants waving branches instead of swords. It's political street theater at best. It's a protest march. He's mocking the empire right at its doorstep. And then John 4, sitting at a well with a Samaritan woman. That moment breaks multiple barriers all at once. Here is a Jewish man speaking to a Samaritan woman, two groups who despised each other. He's a rabbi engaging with a woman in a theological conversation, something that rabbis at the time just didn't do. And he's honoring her at the same time as the first messenger to carry the news of who he really is. The disciples show up shocked because it was unthinkable, really. But in the stories, the Jesus that I see wasn't interested in keeping the rules of patriarchy or cultural prejudice. He went straight through them. That's the Jesus that I see in the Gospels. Disruptive, boundary breaking, rattling cages, not the tame mascot of obedience and comfort. But somewhere along the way, just like Guthrie's song, we've filed down those edges. We've sanitized him. We've turned him into a figure who props up the status quo rather than one who threatens it. And I can't help but wonder if Pete Seeger refused to drop those verses when he sang, "This land is your land," what would it look like for us to refuse to drop the disruptive verses of Jesus' life? What would it look like to insist on telling the whole story, not just the safe version? So why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep cutting out the hard parts of songs of history and faith? I believe there's 4 reasons. The first is we want things to be palatable. The hard truth is that most of us don't like to be uncomfortable. Singing about forests and rivers feel good. Singing about hunger and fences doesn't. A Jesus who pat kids on the head and says, "Love your neighbor," makes for a nice Sunday school felt board. A Jesus who calls out religious hypocrisy and warns about wealth, that's harder to swallow, especially in these churches, giant mega churches. Sanitization makes things easier to consume, like watering down a strong drink until it goes down smooth. Number 2 is I think we want to neutralize threats. Dangerous stories can't stay dangerous if we sand off the edges. Martin Luther King Jr. was seen as a threat to American stability. Now, decades later, he is remembered mostly as a dreamer of unity. I'm not saying that he didn't. I'm not saying that wasn't him. But I'm saying in that being the focal point, it's just safer that way. Same with Guthrie's song, same with Jesus. If you neutralize the protest, you can keep the name, the face, even the chorus without the disruption. Number 3 is we want control. A radical message doesn't sell very well, but a sanitized one does. You can't market Che Guevara's politics, but you can market his face. You can't package Marley's cry against colonial oppression, or you can package a poster that says, "Chill out, smoke some weed." Even faith gets commodified. A cross on a necklace, a Bible verse on a mug. Sanitization turns profits into products and disruption into decoration. And number 4 is we want to protect ourselves. Sometimes it's not about politics or money, it's about survival. The full story is too heavy to face. Telling the truth about racism, poverty, or religious abuse means we have to wrestle with complicity, with guilt, and change. So we tell the lighter version. We sanitize version so that it becomes like a shield, a way of saying, "Don't make me face what this really means." And the tragedy is when we sanitize, we don't just lose the hard parts, we lose the transformative parts as well. Because think about it. When has anyone's life ever been changed by the easy parts of a story? By the lines that go down smooth? The verses that don't demand anything of us? No. It's the verses that sting, the parables that make us uncomfortable, the songs that break our hearts, the stories that don't fit neatly into our categories. That's the stuff that wakes us up. That's the moment in Guthrie's song where you hear "no trespassing" verse, and it makes us question who really owns the land. That's the moment Jesus flips the tables, and suddenly religion isn't about comfort anymore, it's about justice. That's the moment MLK starts talking about militarism and poverty, when we realize the dream is bigger and costlier than we were taught. But when we cut those edges off, yeah, the story might sound nice, but it's lost all of its power. It becomes decoration instead of disruption, posters on a wall, songs in songbooks, a bumper sticker on a car, or a t-shirt from frickin' Target. But it won't move you. It won't shake anything loose. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why we sanitize, because transformation is dangerous. If we really let these stories speak in full, they might change the way we live, the way we spend, the way we love, the way we use power. They might demand more of us than we're ready to give. But the other side of it is this: when we protect ourselves from the sting, we also protect ourselves from the healing. When we avoid the discomfort, we also avoid the growth. Sanitization keeps us safe, sure, but it also keeps us stuck. And so here's what makes me wonder. If we could sit across the table from these people, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Martin Luther King Jr., Bob Marley, Che Guevara, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, John Lennon, Cesar Chavez, or Jesus himself, would they smile and say, "You got it? You carried it forward? You kept the fire burning?" Or would they look at us with disappointment in their eyes and ask, "Why did you cut out the hard parts? Why did you drop the verses that matter? Why did you file down the edges that were meant to unsettle you? Why did you turn my protest into a slogan, my disruption into a decoration, my face on a t-shirt, my vision into something safe, easy, and marketable?" It's really hard for me to shake those questions. Because if it's the disruptive edge that carries the power, the verse that stings, the parable that offends, the story that refuses to fit neatly in our categories, what happens when we cut the edges off? Because we're not just dishonoring their legacy, we're robbing ourselves. We're trading transformation for comfort, and we're choosing to stay the same when the whole point of the message was to change us. And I think the haunting truth is this: if they sat across from us today, they might not recognize the versions of themselves that we've created. So I keep thinking back to that plane, cramped seat, headphones in, watching the Dylan movie, seeing Pete Seeger in court, no idea that he got in trouble for his song. Because that's when I realized that I'd spent most of my life singing only half of the story. And that's what haunts me. Because I wonder how many times I've done that in other places. How many times have I accepted the safe version of a story because it was easier, lighter, and cleaner? How many times have I been content with decoration instead of disruption and with comfort instead of change? Or maybe where have I watered down myself just to fit neatly into a box instead of telling my story, my full story, my whole story? It's like I said, sanitation just smooths out the rough edges so we don't have to wrestle with them. Turns protests into patriotic sing-alongs and revolutionaries into t-shirts. That turns Jesus into a fucking mascot. But in doing so, it steals the very thing that gave the story its power in the first place. And we lose something when we do that. We lose the thing that wakes us up. We lose the discomfort that pushes us to grow. And we lose the transformation that can only come with sharp edges of truth. So I think the invitation is this: don't stop at the safe version. Go looking for the verses they cut out, the stories they've trimmed down, the voices they tried to declaw. Sit with them. Let them sting. Let them burn. Let them hurt. Let them unsettle you. Let them break your heart. Because the easy version will always be there. The sanitized Guthrie, the sanitized Jesus. But the full story, that's where the power is. And that's where the change lives. Maybe next time, if you hear that chorus, "This land is your land, this land is my land," you'll remember the real story isn't in the chorus we all know. It's in the verses that we weren't supposed to sing. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Clemens with a Z. If this episode stirred something in you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or DM me over at Instagram at clemenswithaz, Instagram podcast page. If it also stirred something in you, I'd love it to share it with someone that you think that would get an impact out of this. If you want to go deeper, you can check out my Substack where I'm writing devotionals and reflections. You can find a link in the show notes. There's also a link for the GoFundMe if you want to support the podcast financially. You can head over to clemenswithaz.com. There's a merch store. You can pick up a glass, cup, a sticker, a hat, whatever you want. Every little bit helps. And if you haven't yet, please take a second to rate, review, like, and subscribe wherever you're listening. It really helps more people find this conversation. And I know I always say this, but I mean it every time. I'm just a channel, I ain't the source. So as I go, here's the question that I'll leave you. Whose story have you been handed in its sanitized version? And what would it look like for you to go searching for the verses, the voices, and the truths that got cut out? Peace.